My friend, some patterns in nature seem almost too complicated to understand. Tree branches, lightning, river networks, clouds, coastlines, even the hidden pathways inside your lungs. They all look wild at first, almost random, almost impossible to describe. But they may be following a special kind of geometry. A geometry where the same shape can appear inside itself, where rough edges can hide deep order, where a simple rule can open into a pattern that seems to have no end. That geometry is called fractal geometry, and once you begin to see it, the world starts to look different. In this video, we'll gently explore how simple patterns repeat through scale, why nature so often builds with fractals, and what in your own body is built with fractals. So settle in, let the day soften, and let's begin with the strange shapes that repeat forever. Chapter 1. The strange shapes that repeat forever. To understand fractals is to notice one of the quiet rules behind nature's complexity. Simple patterns can repeat through scale until they begin to look almost endless. At first, a fractal may seem like a strange mathematical decoration, something made for computer screens, glowing with spirals, branches, and impossible edges. But the deeper idea is older and more important than that. A fractal is a shape, pattern, or structure that keeps revealing related forms as you look more closely. It may not repeat perfectly in every case, and in the natural world, it almost never repeats with mechanical precision. Yet there is a family resemblance between the large shape and the smaller details inside it. The whole seems to echo through its parts. This is why fractals can feel familiar before we even know what they are. You can see something fractal-like in the branching of a tree, where the trunk divides into limbs. The limbs divide into smaller branches, and those branches divide again into twigs. You can see it in the veins of a leaf, in river systems seen from above, in lightning spreading across the sky, in frost crystals on a cold window, and in the delicate branching pathways inside the human lung. These shapes are irregular, but their irregularity has structure. They are rough, but their roughness is organized. Ordinary geometry gives us clean shapes. A circle, a square, a triangle, a cube, or a sphere can be described with smooth boundaries and simple dimensions. These shapes are extremely useful because they let us measure, build, design, and calculate with clarity. But the natural world is rarely made of perfect circles and flawless squares. A mountain ridge is not a smooth triangle. A cloud is not a polished sphere. A coastline is not a clean curve drawn with a steady hand. Nature is full of edges that wiggle, surfaces that wrinkle, paths that branch, and forms that grow by repeating a basic tendency again and again. Fractals gave scientists and mathematicians a language for this kind of complexity. They offered a way to talk about shapes that look too rough for classical geometry but too patterned to be dismissed as disorder. The word fractal comes from an idea of brokenness or fragmentation, which is fitting because fractal shapes often look divided, cracked, branched, folded, or jagged. Yet the brokenness is not a failure of form. It is the form. A fractal is often powerful precisely because it does not smooth away detail. It allows detail to remain visible at many levels. One of the most important ideas behind fractals is scale. Scale simply means the size at which you are looking. A city looks one way from the street, another way from an airplane, and another way from a map. A tree looks one way from a distance, another way when you stand beneath it, and another way when you study the fine veins inside a leaf. Fractals are patterns where changing scale does not erase the basic character of the shape. As you move closer, you do not simply find flatness or emptiness. You find more structure. This is the reason fractals are often described as shapes that repeat forever. In exact mathematical fractals, the repetition can continue without end in principle. A simple rule is applied again and again, and each repetition creates a smaller version or a related version of the previous shape. The pattern can be magnified endlessly in thought, and new detail keeps appearing. No real physical object can contain literally infinite detail because matter is made of atoms and limited by physical scale. But mathematics is not limited in the same way. In mathematics, an ideal fractal can keep unfolding forever. This difference between mathematical fractals and natural fractal-like forms is important. A computer image of a fractal may show a pattern that continues with astonishing precision as it is magnified. A tree cannot do that endlessly. Eventually, you reach the size of cells, molecules, and atoms, and the branching pattern stops. A coastline cannot wiggle with infinite detail in the physical world. Eventually, there are grains of sand, rocks, water molecules, and the limits of measurement. But even though nature does not create perfect infinite fractals, it often creates patterns that behave fractally across a wide range of scales. That is enough to make the idea scientifically useful. The reason these patterns appear so often is that many natural processes repeat simple actions under changing conditions. A branch grows toward light, divides, and grows again. A river follows gravity, erodes softer ground, meets obstacles, splits into channels, and gathers smaller streams. Lightning searches for a conductive path through air, branching as electrical forces build and release. Blood vessels divide again and again to carry oxygen and nutrients into tissues. The exact details differ, but the underlying logic often involves growth, branching, flow, resistance, and efficiency. Fractals are often solutions to physical problems. A branching structure can fill space without being solid. That is one of its great advantages. The lungs, for example, need to bring air into close contact with blood across a large internal surface. A simple hollow balloon would not be enough. Instead, the airways branch repeatedly, creating a vast exchange surface packed into the chest. Blood vessels do something similar throughout the body. They begin with large pathways and divide into smaller and smaller vessels so that materials can reach living cells. This is a fractal-like strategy. Use repeated branching to connect a large system to tiny local regions. The same idea appears outside biology. River networks drain huge landscapes by connecting small streams to larger streams, then to rivers, and finally to the sea. Tree roots spread through soil to gather water and minerals. Fungal networks branch through decaying matter, exploring space and moving nutrients. Even cracks in drying mud can show repeating structure, because stress spreads through material in paths shaped by resistance and weakness. Fractals help us see that many complex patterns may be different expressions of similar principles. Fractals also change the way people think about measurement. Imagine trying to measure the edge of a rugged coastline. From far away, the coastline may look like a simple line. If you use a long measuring stick, you skip over many small bays and points. If you use a shorter measuring stick, you follow more of the twists. If you use an even shorter one, you find still more detail. The measured length can keep growing as your measuring scale becomes finer. This does not mean the coastline is magical. It means the shape is irregular across many scales, so the answer depends on how closely you look. This idea can feel surprising because we are used to thinking that length is simply there, waiting to be measured. For many smooth objects, that works well, but rough natural boundaries challenge that intuition. A fractal-like edge can be too detailed for a single simple measurement to capture its character. To describe it properly, scientists may need to ask how its measured length changes with scale, or how much space it fills as it becomes more detailed. This leads to the idea of fractal dimension, which we will explore later. For now, the important point is simple. Fractals reveal that some shapes behave differently depending on the scale of observation. This is why fractals are connected to the feeling of infinity. When you look at a fractal, especially a mathematical one, you may feel as if the image contains a world inside itself. Zoom in, and there is another pattern. Zoom again, and there is still more. The boundary between simple and complex begins to blur. A small rule can produce a shape that no human hand could draw completely. A repeated process can create a landscape of spirals, islands, branches, and filaments. The result feels alive, even when it comes from mathematics alone. The famous examples of fractals are often built from very simple instructions. A shape may be divided, copied, rotated, removed, or repeated. A line may be replaced with a bent pattern, and then each smaller line may be replaced again. None of these actions needs to be complicated. The depth comes from repetition. This is one of the most beautiful lessons of fractals. Complexity does not always require complicated beginnings. Sometimes it emerges when a simple rule is allowed to echo. For this first chapter, we can stay with the quiet wonder of the basic idea. A fractal is a shape that invites you to look again. It tells you that detail is not always noise. It tells you that repetition can create richness. It shows that the natural world is filled with branching, jagged, folded, and recursive patterns that carry order inside their roughness. Perhaps this is why fractals are so calming to look at. They give the mind something it recognizes but cannot fully finish. They are predictable enough to feel coherent and unpredictable enough to remain interesting. A tree branch resembles a tree, but it is not a perfect copy. A river delta resembles a branching root system, but it belongs to water and sediment. A cloud has no hard edge, but its softness still has structure. Fractals let us rest in that middle place between order and surprise. As we begin this journey, imagine the universe as a place where patterns keep returning in new sizes and new materials. The same kind of branching can appear in wood, water, air, blood, stone, electricity, and mathematics. The forms are different, but the idea quietly repeats. Simple processes, acting again and again, can build shapes of astonishing depth. And for now, that is enough to hold gently in the mind. Let the thought become soft. The world does not need to be perfectly smooth to be beautifully ordered. As the day loosens its grip, you can simply rest with these repeating patterns, letting each branch, curve, and quiet echo fade into the calm darkness of sleep. Chapter 2. What makes a fractal different from an ordinary shape? Most of the shapes we learn first are calm, smooth, and complete. A circle has a clean edge. A square has straight sides and sharp corners. A triangle can be drawn with only a few lines. A sphere feels like the purest version of roundness. These shapes are powerful because they are simple enough to describe precisely. They helped human beings build houses, measure land, design machines, and navigate oceans. Ordinary geometry is a great achievement of thought because it turns space into something the mind can handle. But ordinary shapes have a silence about them. Once you know the rule, there is little more to discover by looking closer. If you draw a perfect circle and magnify a tiny part of its edge, that tiny part becomes like a straight line. The closer you look, the smoother it seems. If you zoom in on the flat face of a perfect cube, you find the same flatness. The shape has a clear boundary, a clear dimension, and a clear way of being measured. A fractal behaves differently. It does not settle down into smoothness as quickly. When you look closer, the shape can keep revealing smaller structure. The edge may remain rough, the branches may divide again, the pattern may change in detail while still preserving a recognizable character. A fractal is different from an ordinary shape because its complexity is tied to scale. The act of looking closer becomes part of the story of the shape. This is one of the reasons fractals are so useful for describing the natural world. Many real forms do not become simple when examined closely. A mountain slope may look jagged from far away, and when you walk across it, the rocks, cracks, ridges, and grains bring another level of roughness. A cloud may look soft and rounded from the ground, but its boundary is full of curls, folds, wisps, and broken edges. A leaf may look like a simple green surface from a distance, while its veins create a branching network when seen nearby. Ordinary geometry can approximate these things, but it often has to smooth them first. Fractal geometry allows the roughness to matter. The difference begins with the question of detail. In an ordinary shape, detail is often treated as an imperfection. A real coin is never a perfect circle because its edge has scratches and tiny dents. A real table is never a perfect rectangle because its surface has texture and its corners are worn. Classical geometry often removes these imperfections so that the ideal form becomes easier to study. This is useful. A bridge engineer, an architect, or a physicist may need clean models to make reliable calculations. But if the detail itself is important, smoothing it away can hide the very thing we are trying to understand. Fractals are built for detail. Their irregularity is part of their identity. A fractal curve may bend, fold, branch, or break in a repeating way. Its small parts may resemble larger parts, or they may follow the same general style of growth. The pattern can look complicated, yet it is often created by a process that is surprisingly simple. The shape does not need a smooth outline to be meaningful. It has meaning through repetition, scaling, and structure. Another difference involves dimension. In ordinary geometry, dimensions feel easy to sort. A line has one dimension because you can move along it in one direction. A flat surface has two dimensions because you can move across it with length and width. A solid object has three dimensions because it also has depth. These categories work beautifully for ideal shapes. A straight line, a square, and a cube each belong clearly to their own level of space. Fractals disturb this neat separation. Some fractal patterns behave as if they live between dimensions. A highly twisted curve may still be drawn as a line, but it can wander so densely through a region that it begins to fill space more like a surface. A rough surface may be more complicated than an ordinary smooth surface because its folds and wrinkles add structure at many scales. This does not mean a fractal literally escapes physical space. It means its pattern of detail changes how it fills space. Fractal dimension gives a way to describe that behavior, although the deeper explanation belongs later in the journey. A simple example can make this clearer. Imagine a straight path across a field. Its length is easy to understand. Now imagine a path that wiggles back and forth. It is longer than the straight path. If the wiggles contain smaller wiggles, the path becomes longer again. If the smaller wiggles contain still smaller wiggles, the length grows more. A fractal-like line can carry a great deal of length inside a small area because it keeps folding detail into itself. This is very different from the clean, quiet edge of a circle. The boundary of an ordinary shape usually separates inside from outside in a simple way. With a circle, you can say clearly whether a point is inside the circle or outside it. The edge itself is smooth and predictable. With many fractal boundaries, the edge can become the most interesting part. It may twist around islands of space, curl into spirals, or branch into tiny filaments. The boundary may contain more visual richness than the interior. If that boundary is rough or folded, it may have far more contact area than a smooth shape of similar size, which can affect how things mix, react, grow, absorb, erode, or exchange energy. Ordinary geometry is still essential. It is not wrong simply because fractals exist. A planet can be treated as a sphere for many calculations, even though its mountains, valleys, oceans, and atmosphere make the real object more complex. Science often works by choosing the right level of simplification. The key is knowing what the simplification leaves out. Fractals become important when the left-out detail controls the behavior of the system. A smooth model of a lung would miss the branching architecture that makes gas exchange possible. A simple line for a coastline would miss the bays, inlets, and rough edges that shape erosion, habitats, and currents. A plain surface model of a porous rock would miss the tiny channels that allow fluids to move through it. In these cases, complexity is function. A fractal also differs from an ordinary shape in the way it is often generated. Many familiar geometric objects can be drawn all at once from a definition. A circle is all points at the same distance from a center. A square is 4 equal sides meeting at right angles. These definitions describe complete objects. Fractals are often produced through iteration, which means repeating a rule. You start with a simple shape or condition, apply a transformation, then apply it again to the result, and continue. The final richness comes from the repeated action. This repeated action connects fractals to growth. Nature rarely draws finished forms in a single instant. A tree grows step by step. A snow crystal forms as water molecules attach under changing temperature and humidity. A river network develops as water flows, erodes, and reorganizes the land. A crack spreads through material under stress. These processes have history. Their shapes are records of repeated local events. Fractal geometry is well suited to forms that are made by becoming. There is also a difference in how the eye experiences the shape. Ordinary shapes often feel stable and finished. A square is easy to recognize and easy to remember. A fractal invites wandering attention. The eye follows a branch and finds smaller branches. It follows a curve and finds smaller curves. It moves from the large pattern into the small pattern and back again. This is why fractals can feel both structured and mysterious. They provide enough order for the brain to follow, while leaving enough variation to keep perception awake. This does not mean every rough or complicated shape is automatically a fractal. A pile of broken glass may be irregular, but it does not necessarily show organized repetition across scales. A random scribble may be complex without having fractal structure. For a shape to be called fractal in a meaningful way, there must be some kind of scale-related pattern, some way in which smaller parts reflect the larger structure or follow a related rule. The resemblance may be exact in mathematics or approximate in nature, but it must be more than mere messiness. Fractals expand our idea of what a shape can be. A shape does not have to be smooth to be understandable. It can refuse the old, neat categories of line, surface, and solid. It can keep its detail when magnified. A shape can be rough and still lawful, irregular and still patterned, built from repetition rather than drawn as a single finished outline. So when we ask what makes a fractal different from an ordinary shape, the answer is more than visual. It is a difference in behavior. Ordinary shapes become simpler as we idealize them. Fractals often become richer as we examine them. Ordinary shapes are usually described by smoothness, fixed dimension, and clean boundaries. Fractals are described by scale, repetition, roughness, and detail that matters. This gives us a new way to look at the world around us. The cracked bark of a tree, the branching veins of a leaf, the ragged line of a cloud, the delicate edge of frost, and the winding shape of a river are no longer just irregularities. They become signs that nature often builds through repeated processes. The world is full of shapes that do not ask to be polished into perfect circles before they can be understood. And as you let that idea settle, the ordinary room around you may begin to feel slightly different. The textures, shadows, folds, and edges of things become quieter and more meaningful. Nothing needs to be perfectly smooth to belong. Even the rough places have their own order, and you can rest inside that thought as the day slowly fades. Chapter 3. Self-Similarity, the pattern inside the pattern. Self-similarity is the quiet reason a fractal can feel as if it contains a smaller world inside itself, and then another smaller world inside that one. The idea is simple at first. A self-similar pattern is a pattern in which a smaller part resembles a larger part. The resemblance may be nearly perfect, as in some mathematical fractals, or it may be loose and natural, as in many living and physical systems. What matters is that the shape carries a recognizable style through different scales. When you look at the whole, and then at a piece of the whole, you feel that the same kind of structure has returned. This does not mean every part must be an exact miniature copy. In nature, exact copying is rare. A branch on a tree resembles the tree, but it does not copy the full tree with perfect accuracy. A fern leaflet may resemble the full fern leaf more closely, yet even there, growth, damage, light, moisture, and chance create variation. A river tributary may resemble a larger river system, but it also follows local rock, slope, soil, and rainfall. Natural self-similarity is usually a family resemblance rather than a mechanical duplication. Mathematical self-similarity can be much stricter. Some ideal fractals are made so that each small piece is a precise reduced copy of the whole or of a larger section. If you enlarge that piece, the same pattern appears again. This exactness can continue indefinitely in mathematics, because the pattern is created by a rule rather than by matter. The rule can be repeated as many times as the mind allows. Physical objects cannot do this forever. They are limited by atoms, energy, growth conditions, and the history of how they formed. Yet mathematical examples are useful because they show the principle in its purest form. A helpful way to imagine self-similarity is to picture a simple branching pattern. A central stem divides into smaller stems. Each smaller stem divides again. The new branches do not have to be identical, but they follow a similar logic. The whole form is made by repeating a basic act. Extend, divide, extend again. Over time, this repeated act creates a structure that can spread widely while still remaining connected. The pattern inside the pattern is not hidden by accident. It is produced by the way the form grows. This is why self-similarity often appears in systems that build themselves step by step. A plant does not begin as a fully drawn adult tree. It grows through repeated local processes. Cells divide, tissues extend, buds form. Branches respond to light, gravity, wind, and available resources. The shape becomes a record of repeated growth decisions made at many points. Because the same biological rules keep acting again and again, similar shapes can appear at several sizes. The same kind of thinking applies to many non-living systems. A snow crystal grows as water molecules attach to an existing structure under particular conditions. The result depends on temperature, humidity, and the microscopic arrangement of ice. As the crystal grows, small arms and side branches may form along larger arms. The pattern is shaped by repeated attachment and by the movement of heat and vapor around the crystal. Snow crystals are not all fractals in a strict mathematical sense, and they do not continue forever in detail. Still, many of them show a striking kind of repeated branching and symmetry that makes self-similarity easy to see. Self-similarity also appears when a process spreads through a medium. Lightning is one example. Electrical charge builds until air breaks down along branching paths. The main channel may split into smaller paths, and those paths may split again. The final flash we see is brief, but the branching structure reflects a search through space. Similar branching patterns can appear in cracks, mineral deposits, and certain discharge patterns because forces move through uneven materials. The exact cause differs from case to case, yet repeated splitting can produce a shape with related structure at different scales. One important scientific idea connected to self-similarity is scale invariance. This means that some features of a pattern remain similar when the scale changes. If you zoom in or out and the overall character stays recognizable, the pattern has a kind of scale invariance. In a perfect mathematical fractal, this can be exact. In nature, it is usually approximate and limited. A coastline may look jagged from an airplane and still jagged from a hill above the shore, but at the scale of grains of sand and water molecules, the pattern changes. A lung airway tree may branch across many levels, but eventually it reaches tiny air sacs where the structure changes function. Natural scale invariance has boundaries. These boundaries are important because they keep the science honest. It can be tempting to call every repeating natural shape a fractal and leave it there. But real systems must be studied carefully. Scientists look at whether a pattern truly shows similar structure across a meaningful range of scales. They ask whether measurements change in a consistent way as the scale changes. They ask whether the pattern comes from a known physical or biological process. Self-similarity is powerful, but it is not a magic label. It is a clue about how a system may be organized. There are different degrees of self-similarity. Exact self-similarity is the cleanest case, where a smaller piece is a precise copy of a larger pattern. Approximate self-similarity is more common in nature, where pieces resemble the whole without matching perfectly. There is also a statistical kind of self-similarity, where the small and large patterns do not look identical in every detail, but they share the same general texture, roughness, or distribution of features. A mountain range may not repeat the same mountain shape again and again, yet its roughness can have a similar character across several scales. The pattern repeats as a statistical quality rather than as a visible copy. This statistical form is especially important for natural landscapes. If you look at certain rocky surfaces, clouds, or turbulent flows, you may not find a neat miniature version of the whole. Instead, you find similar roughness. Large variations contain smaller variations, and those smaller variations contain finer variations. The structure feels related even when no single piece is a perfect image of another. This helps explain why fractal ideas became useful in studying objects and systems that once seemed too irregular for simple geometry. Self-similarity can also help a system solve practical problems. Branching networks, for example, are efficient ways to move material, energy, or information between large and small scales. A blood vessel network must connect a central pump to tiny regions of tissue. A plant must move water from roots to leaves and distribute sugars through its body. A river network must collect rainfall from many small areas and carry it toward larger channels. Repeated branching allows these systems to connect the local and the global. The pattern inside the pattern is not decoration. It helps the system work. In mathematics, self-similarity shows how complexity can arise from recursion. Recursion means that a rule refers back to its own result. You apply a rule, then apply the same rule to what you have just made. This creates a layered structure. The process may begin with something very simple, such as a line, a triangle, or a square. After repeated steps, the shape becomes rich and surprising. Each stage carries the memory of the same instruction. Self-similarity is the visible trace of repeated rule-making. This matters because it changes how we think about complexity. When we see a complicated natural pattern, we may assume that it must have required a complicated plan. Fractals show another possibility. A simple rule, repeated under changing conditions, can create a form that appears far richer than the rule itself. The shape of a branching tree does not need every twig to be planned in advance. Growth rules, environmental conditions, and physical limits can generate the final complexity. The same general lesson appears in river networks, crystal growth, and many branching systems. Self-similarity also changes the way we look. Instead of seeing a small part as separate from the whole, we begin to see it as a local expression of a wider pattern. A twig is not merely an isolated piece of wood. It carries the branching logic of the tree. A small stream is not simply a line of water. It belongs to a drainage pattern that gathers an entire landscape. A vein in a leaf is part of a network that repeats its distribution logic from the central vein to finer pathways. The small shape becomes meaningful because it echoes the larger one. There is something deeply calming about this idea. It suggests that complexity does not always have to be understood all at once. You can begin with one piece and notice how it relates to the rest. The pattern does not need to reveal itself in a single glance. It can unfold gently, scale by scale. A fractal teaches patience because it rewards slower seeing, and perhaps that is why self-similarity feels so natural to the mind. We live in a world where small things often carry the memory of larger things. A single leaf can hint at the tree. A small wave can hint at the sea. A quiet branch against the evening sky can hint at the hidden rules of growth. So as this thought settles, let the pattern become softer. You do not have to follow every branch to its end. You can simply notice the echo, the gentle return of form within form, and allow the mind to drift with it. The day becomes smaller now, like a pattern fading into the distance, while calm repeats quietly inside calm. Chapter 4. The Infinite Coastline Problem. A coastline seems like one of the simplest things in the world to measure, until you ask what its length really means. Imagine standing above a map and tracing the edge where land meets sea. The shape looks clear enough. There's water on one side, land on the other, and a boundary between them. It feels natural to believe that this boundary must have a definite length, the same way a road has a length or a table has a width. But the closer you look at a coastline, the less simple that belief becomes. The shore is not a smooth line. It bends around cliffs, beaches, stones, pools, cracks, and grains of sand. Each closer view reveals smaller turns that were invisible before. This is the heart of the coastline problem. The measured length of a rough coast depends on the size of the measuring tool. Use a very long ruler, and the measurement skips over many curves and inlets. Use a shorter ruler, and it follows more of the shape. Use a still shorter ruler, and it catches even more bends. The coastline has not changed, but the answer has. The length grows because the measurement is now sensitive to finer detail. At first, this may feel like a failure of measuring. It may seem that we simply need better instruments, but the problem is more interesting than that. Better instruments do not always bring us closer to a single final answer. With a very rough boundary, increasing precision can reveal more structure rather than settling the question. A coastline is made of details at many sizes, and each size contributes something to the total path. The length you get is partly a statement about the shore and partly a statement about how closely you chose to examine it. This is very different from measuring an ordinary smooth object. If you measure the circumference of a smooth circular pond, a rough measurement may be imperfect, but finer measurements approach a stable value. The more carefully you measure, the closer you get to a clear answer. A smooth curve behaves kindly in that way. Its small details do not multiply endlessly. When magnified enough, a tiny piece of the curve becomes almost straight. A coastline does not behave so kindly across the same range of scales. From far away, a stretch of shore may look like a gentle arc. From closer up, the arc becomes a series of bays and headlands. From a closer view still, those bays and headlands contain smaller curves, rock edges, tide pools, broken shells, pebbles, and grains. In the real world, this cannot continue forever because physical matter has limits. But across ordinary human scales, the effect can be strong enough to make coastline length surprisingly dependent on the measuring scale. This is why two people can give different lengths for the same coast, and both can be following reasonable methods. One may measure from a simplified map, another may use a detailed survey. A third may include every estuary, island edge, tidal channel, and small inlet. Their answers differ because they are not measuring exactly the same level of detail. The question, how long is this coast, is incomplete until we also ask, at what scale are we measuring? This is one of the great lessons of fractal geometry. Some natural shapes cannot be fully described by ordinary measurements alone. Length is usually treated as a fixed property, something the object simply has. But for rough, scale-sensitive shapes, length becomes related to resolution. Resolution means the smallest detail your measurement includes. A low-resolution map smooths the world. A high-resolution map reveals more of it. Neither view is useless. Each view answers a different version of the question. The coastline problem is often called a paradox. although it is not a contradiction in nature. The sea is not secretly changing the shore each time we measure it. The apparent paradox comes from the assumption that a rough boundary should behave like a smooth line. Once that assumption is removed, the strangeness becomes understandable. The coastline is a boundary with structure across many scales, and its measured length depends on how much of that structure we include. The tide makes the situation even more subtle. The boundary between land and sea is not fixed in time. Water rises and falls. Waves move across sand and rock. Storms reshape beaches. Sediment is carried away and deposited elsewhere. Cliffs erode. River mouths shift. The coast is a living edge in a physical sense, constantly adjusted by water, wind, gravity, and geological change. Even if we agree on a measuring scale, we must also decide when and under what conditions the coast is being measured. Still, the mathematical lesson remains, even if we imagine a frozen coastline at one moment. The roughness of the edge creates the scale problem. Fractal geometry gives a way to study that roughness without forcing it to become smooth. Instead of asking only for one final length, we can ask how the measured length changes as the measuring stick becomes smaller. If the length increases in a consistent pattern, the coast may show fractal-like behavior across that range of scales. This leads toward the idea of fractal dimension. In ordinary geometry, a line is one-dimensional because it extends in length. A surface is two-dimensional because it has length and width. But a very rough curve can act as though it is more complicated than a simple line. It may twist and fold so much that it begins to occupy space more densely. It does not become a full surface, but it also behaves differently from a clean line. Fractal dimension gives a way to express this in-between behavior. The coastline problem helps make that idea feel less abstract. A smooth line across a map has a length that settles down as we measure more carefully. A rough coast keeps offering extra path as the ruler becomes smaller. Its complexity can be described by how quickly the measured length grows. A coast with gentle curves may grow slowly. A coast with many fjords, islands, cracks, and inlets may grow faster. The difference tells us something real about the shape. This matters beyond geography. The same kind of scale-sensitive measurement appears in many fields. The surface of a porous rock may have far more internal area than it appears to have from the outside. This matters for water flow, oil movement, mineral reactions, and the storage of fluids. The boundary of a cloud can be hard to define because its edges are turbulent and diffuse. The shape of a branching river system depends on the scale of the map. The rough surface of a material can affect friction, adhesion, chemical reactions, and how light scatters from it. In each case, the amount of detail included in the measurement changes the result. Even living tissues can show similar lessons. The inner surface of the lungs is highly folded and branched so that a large exchange area can fit inside the body. The lining of the intestine has folds and projections that increase surface area for absorption. These are not coastlines, but they show why roughness and folding matter. Nature often uses complex boundaries to create more contact, more exchange, and more function within limited space. The infinite coastline problem also teaches humility. It reminds us that measurement is not only about numbers, it is also about choosing the right question. A number without scale can mislead. A coastline length printed in a book may look final, but behind it lies a decision about maps, methods, tides, and resolution. Science becomes stronger when those decisions are made visible. This does not mean measurement is unreliable. It means measurement is more thoughtful than it first appears. For practical purposes, we can choose a scale that matches the problem. A sailor, a cartographer, an ecologist, and a geologist may all care about different details. A broad navigation chart does not need every pebble. A habitat study may need small coves and tidal pools. A study of erosion may need fine features of rock and sediment. The useful measurement depends on the purpose. Fractals help us see why this is reasonable. They do not make the world less measurable. They make measurement more honest. They tell us that some shapes are rich enough that scale must be part of the description. When we say how long a coast is, how rough a surface is, or how complex a boundary is, we are also saying how closely we looked. There is something quietly beautiful in that. A coastline is not just a line separating land from sea. It is a meeting place of forces, a record of waves, stone, weather, time, and motion. Its length is not a simple fact waiting alone in the world. It is a relationship between the shore and the scale of attention we bring to it. As the mind rests with this idea, measurement becomes less harsh and more gentle. The world does not always offer one simple answer, and that is not a failure. Some things become clearer only when we allow them to be complex. Tonight, you can let the coastline remain unfinished in the imagination, turning softly through bays and stones and moonlit water, while the need for exactness slowly drifts away. Chapter 5. The Mandelbrot Set, the universe made from a simple rule. The Mandelbrot set is one of the clearest examples of how a tiny mathematical instruction can open into a world of almost endless structure. At first glance, the Mandelbrot set looks like an image rather than an idea. It appears as a dark, rounded shape surrounded by glowing bands, spirals, filaments, islands, and delicate threads. Many people first meet it as a computer picture, something beautiful and strange, like a map of an imaginary universe. But the image is only the visible surface of a deeper mathematical process. Behind the colors is a question about repetition, growth, and what happens when a simple rule is applied again and again. The Mandelbrot set belongs to the world of complex numbers. A complex number is a number with two parts. One part is placed along an ordinary horizontal number line, and the other part is placed along a vertical direction connected to the square root of -1. That may sound unusual, but visually it is quite simple. Instead of thinking of a number as a point on a line, we can think of a complex number as a point on a flat plane. Each point has a horizontal position and a vertical position. The Mandelbrot set is drawn on this plane. To create the set, every point on that plane is tested by the same repeated rule. The exact symbols are not important for our journey. What matters is the behavior. You begin with a simple starting value. Then you use the point you are testing as part of a repeated calculation. The result of one step becomes the input for the next step. The process continues, step after step, like a question being asked again and again. Will this value stay under control, or will it run away toward larger and larger size? Some points remain bounded. Their values may move around, but they do not escape to infinity. These points belong to the Mandelbrot set, and they are usually colored black in the classic image. Other points escape. Their values grow beyond any reasonable limit after enough repeated steps. These points do not belong to the set. They are often given colors depending on how quickly they escape. A point that escapes quickly may receive one shade, while a point that takes longer may receive another. The colors are not the set itself. They are a way of visualizing the behavior around it. This is an important distinction. The true Mandelbrot set is the collection of points that do not escape under the repeated rule. The bright colors around it show the surrounding landscape of escape times. They help the eye see structure that would otherwise remain hidden. The central dark shape is the set. The colored regions are like weather around a mountain, revealing the contours of a mathematical boundary. That boundary is where the wonder lives. Deep inside the dark region, points remain safely bounded. Far outside it, points escape quickly. Near the edge, the behavior becomes delicate. 2 points extremely close to each other can have very different futures under the same repeated rule. One may stay bounded, while the other escapes after many steps. This sensitivity creates a boundary of extraordinary complexity. It is not smooth. It curls, folds, sprouts, and branches into detail that continues as the image is magnified. The Mandelbrot set is often described as infinitely detailed, and in the mathematical sense, this is correct. If you zoom into the boundary, new structures continue to appear. You may find spirals turning into smaller spirals, bulbs attached to smaller bulbs, branching threads, seahorse-like curves, and tiny shapes that resemble the full set. The image keeps changing, yet it also keeps returning to familiar themes. It feels as though the whole set is remembering itself in smaller and smaller regions. This does not mean that a computer screen can show actual infinity. A screen has pixels, and a computer has limited memory and time. Every rendered image stops at some level of detail. But the mathematical object does not stop there. The rule defines what happens at every scale. The image can always be examined more closely in principle, and the boundary will continue to contain structure. The limitation belongs to our tools, not to the ideal set. One of the most remarkable things about the Mandelbrot set is the contrast between cause and result. The rule that creates it is very short and very simple. The shape that emerges from it is overwhelmingly rich. This contrast is one of the central lessons of fractals. Complexity does not always need a complicated recipe. Sometimes complexity appears when a simple rule is repeated in a space where small differences can grow into large differences. The Mandelbrot set is also a map of stability. Each point asks whether a repeated process remains controlled or becomes unbounded. This is why the set is connected to broader ideas in dynamical systems, the study of how things change when rules are applied over time. The rule does not describe a planet, a fluid, or a living organism directly. It describes a mathematical process. Yet the same general question appears throughout science. When a system evolves step by step, which starting conditions lead to stable behavior and which lead to runaway change? This makes the Mandelbrot set more than a beautiful picture. It is a way of seeing how order and instability can share a boundary. Inside the set, behavior remains bounded. Outside it, behavior escapes. Along the edge, the division between these outcomes becomes intricate. The boundary is not a simple wall. It is a landscape of transition, full of tiny structures created by repeated mathematical feedback. Feedback is the heart of the process. The output of each step becomes part of the next step. This is familiar in many real systems, even though the details are different. A sound echo can feed back through a microphone and speaker. A population can grow depending on how many organisms were present before. A climate process can be strengthened or weakened by its own effects. In the Mandelbrot set, feedback appears in pure mathematical form. Each step carries the memory of the previous step forward. The set also has a close relationship with shapes called Julia sets. Each point associated with the Mandelbrot set can be connected to a different Julia set, which is another kind of fractal created by a related repeated process. In a gentle way, the Mandelbrot set can be thought of as a catalog of behaviors. It tells which related Julia sets are connected and which are broken apart into dust-like pieces. This is one reason the Mandelbrot set matters deeply in mathematics. It does not merely display complexity, it organizes a whole family of complex behaviors. For a general viewer, the most important idea is that the Mandelbrot set turns invisible behavior into visible form. We cannot see a repeated calculation directly. We cannot watch a number decide whether to stay bounded or escape. But when each point is tested and colored according to its behavior, the hidden structure becomes a picture. Mathematics becomes a landscape. The plane of numbers becomes a world with coastlines, valleys, storms, spirals, and islands. There's a strange emotional effect in that transformation. The image looks organic, almost natural, even though it is generated by a precise rule. Some regions resemble coral. Others resemble lightning, feathers, shells, smoke, or branching plants. These resemblances do not mean the Mandelbrot set was designed to imitate nature. They show that repeated processes can create similar kinds of visual richness in very different settings. A mathematical rule and a natural growth process are not the same thing, but repetition and feedback can make both of them produce layered structure. The Mandelbrot set also teaches patience. A quick glance sees only the famous black shape. A slower look finds the boundary. A deeper magnification finds smaller scenes hidden in that boundary. The object rewards attention without ever becoming fully exhausted. It is one of those rare mathematical forms that can be appreciated both as rigorous science and as visual wonder. There is also a gentle lesson in the way the set is made. Every point is treated by the same rule. No special artistic choices are needed to draw the main structure. The richness comes from letting the rule act consistently. The beauty is not painted onto the set from outside. It emerges from the behavior of the points themselves. This is why the Mandelbrot set has become an icon of fractal geometry. It shows self-similarity, infinite detail, sensitive boundaries, and the surprising power of iteration. It gives the eye something spectacular, while giving the mind a precise idea to hold. A simple instruction, repeated patiently, can produce a form that seems larger than imagination. As this chapter closes, let the image become quiet in your mind. A dark shape floating in a field of color, edged by spirals and threads, opening into smaller worlds whenever you come closer. There is no need to chase every detail tonight. The pattern can continue without you following it. Let it unfold softly in the distance, while your thoughts slow down and the day settles into stillness. Chapter 6. Fractals in Nature. Trees, lightning, lungs, and blood vessels. Fractals in nature are fascinating because they show that the same kind of pattern can appear in living bodies, stormy skies, forests, rivers, and even the hidden architecture beneath your skin. When we look at nature through the language of fractals, we are not saying that every natural shape is a perfect mathematical fractal. A tree is not an endless equation. A lung is not a computer image. A flash of lightning is not a finished geometric object. Real forms are made from matter, energy, growth, weather, pressure, and time. They have limits. They have irregularities. They stop at the scale of cells, molecules, grains, droplets, and atoms. Yet many natural systems still show fractal-like structure because they repeat similar patterns across several levels of size. The reason is practical. Nature often has to solve the same problem again and again: how to reach many small places from one larger source. A tree must bring water from the soil into its trunk, then into branches, then into leaves. A lung must bring air from the mouth into deeper and deeper airways until oxygen can pass into the blood. Blood vessels must carry material from the heart into organs and tissues, then return it again. A lightning bolt must find a path through air as electrical charge moves between regions. In each case, branching is an efficient solution. A tree is one of the easiest examples to picture. The trunk rises as the main support and transport pathway. From it, large limbs reach outward. Those limbs divide into smaller branches, and the smaller branches divide again into twigs. Leaves grow at the outer edges, where they can gather sunlight and exchange gases with the air. This repeated branching helps the tree spread a large surface of leaves into space without filling that space with solid wood. It gives the tree reach, flexibility, and access to light. The branching of a tree is not random. It is shaped by biology and environment together. Growth follows genetic instructions inside the plant, but it also responds to sunlight, gravity, wind, water availability, injury, crowding, and the weight of the branches themselves. A tree growing alone in an open field may spread differently from a tree growing in a dense forest. A branch that reaches toward light may thicken and survive, while shaded branches may weaken and fall away. The final shape is a living record of repeated growth under changing conditions. Roots show a related pattern below the ground. A root system begins near the base of the plant and spreads through soil, dividing into smaller and finer roots. The purpose is different from the branches above, but the logic is similar. Roots explore space, absorb water and dissolved minerals, anchor the plant, and interact with fungi and microorganisms. A branching structure allows the plant to contact a large volume of soil while using material efficiently. The root system does not mirror the crown perfectly, but both reveal how repeated branching can connect one organism to a wide environment. Lightning offers a more sudden version of branching. During a storm, electrical differences build between clouds, the ground, and regions of air. Air usually resists the flow of electric charge, but under strong enough electrical stress, parts of it become conductive for a moment. The path does not appear all at once as a smooth line. It develops through branching channels that search through the air. Some channels advance, split, fade, or connect. When a connection becomes strong enough, a bright discharge can follow. The branching shape of lightning comes from the unevenness of the atmosphere and the nature of electrical breakdown. Tiny differences in humidity, pressure, particles, and electric field strength can influence where a channel grows next. The result is a jagged, branching path rather than a neat stroke. It looks dramatic because it is brief and luminous, but the pattern carries the same broad lesson. When a process spreads through a resistant medium, repeated branching can emerge naturally. Inside the human body, fractal-like structure becomes quieter, but even more intimate. The lungs are a beautiful example. Air enters through the windpipe, then moves into two main airways, then into smaller airways that divide again and again. This branching continues until the air reaches tiny sacs where gas exchange occurs. The structure lets the body place a large internal exchange surface inside the chest. Oxygen can move into the blood, and carbon dioxide can move out, all through delicate surfaces that are thin enough for rapid exchange. The lung is not simply a bag of air. If it were, its surface area would be far too limited for the needs of the body. Its branching form increases contact between air and blood while keeping breathing efficient. Large airways move air quickly. Smaller airways distribute it widely. The finest regions bring air close to the bloodstream. This layered design is one reason the body can support constant activity, repair, warmth, thought, and motion. Every quiet breath depends on a branching architecture you never need to consciously control. Blood vessels form another hidden forest. Blood leaves the heart through large arteries, then passes into smaller arteries, then into tiny vessels where exchange with tissues can occur. These smallest vessels bring oxygen and nutrients close to cells and collect waste products. After that, blood returns through larger and larger vessels. The entire network must balance pressure, flow, distance, and the needs of different tissues. It must reach almost everywhere while fitting inside the body. This is where fractal-like organization becomes more than a visual pattern. It is a transport strategy. A body is too large for every cell to sit next to the heart or lungs. Branching networks solve the distance problem by dividing flow into smaller paths. They connect central sources to countless local destinations. The same idea appears in leaf veins, river systems, roots, and fungal networks. A repeated branching pattern lets resources move through a complex space. The shape of blood vessels also changes with function. Large arteries need strong, elastic walls because they handle high pressure from the heart. Smaller vessels control distribution and resistance. The tiniest vessels allow exchange. The network is not a simple copy repeated mechanically. It is organized across scales, with different parts adapted to different tasks. This is a key point about natural fractals. Similarity does not erase specialization. A branching pattern can repeat while each level performs its own role. Nature also uses fractal-like folding, not only branching. The inner surfaces of some organs are folded to increase contact area. The intestine, for example, has folds and tiny projections that help absorb nutrients from food. The brain has a folded outer layer that allows more neural tissue to fit inside the skull. These examples are not the same as a branching tree, but they show a related principle. When space is limited, folding and roughening a surface can increase the area available for interaction. There are fractal-like patterns in landscapes as well. Rivers gather water through networks of streams. Small channels join larger ones, and larger ones join rivers that cross valleys toward lakes or seas. The exact pattern depends on slope, rock type, rainfall, soil, vegetation, and geological history. Even so, many river networks show branching organization because water must drain a wide landscape through connected pathways. Seen from above, the pattern can resemble roots, veins, or lightning because the underlying problem is related. Connect many small regions to larger channels. These similarities across nature do not mean that trees, lungs, rivers, and lightning are all made by the same mechanism. They are not. Biology grows tissue. Electricity breaks through air. Water erodes land. Blood flows through vessels built by living development. The scientific value of fractals is that they help describe a shared kind of structure without pretending that the causes are identical. Fractal geometry gives a vocabulary for branching, scaling, roughness, and repeated organization. It is also important to remember that natural fractal-like patterns are limited. A tree does not branch forever. Blood vessels reach a smallest useful size. Lightning stops when the discharge ends. A river network is limited by the land it drains. Nature creates repetition across a range, then physical reality sets a boundary. This is one difference between living in physical systems and ideal mathematical forms. The beauty of the natural world is not that it becomes infinite, but that it can carry deep order within real limits. Fractals in nature reveal a calm kind of intelligence in physical form. No tree needs to understand geometry in order to branch. No lung needs to know mathematics in order to breathe. No river needs a plan in order to drain a landscape. Patterns emerge because matter and energy follow rules, because growth responds to conditions, because flow searches for paths, and because repeated processes leave shapes behind. So when you see a tree against the sky, a bolt of lightning in a storm, or the fine veins of a leaf, you are seeing more than decoration. You are seeing a natural solution to movement, exchange, support, and survival. The pattern is beautiful because it works, and it works because it repeats with variation. As the chapter settles, let your own breathing become part of the idea. Air moves through branching passages without effort. Blood moves through quiet pathways without needing your attention. Somewhere outside, branches rest in the dark, rivers continue their slow paths, and the world keeps repeating its gentle shapes. You can let the day loosen now, trusting the hidden patterns that carry life softly onward. Chapter 7: Chaos, Fractals, and the Hidden Order of Unpredictable Systems. Chaos is not the same as pure randomness. In science, chaos means something more subtle. A system can follow rules and still become difficult to predict. This idea may sound contradictory at first. If something follows rules, we might expect it to be predictable. If we know the starting point and the laws of motion, we might imagine that the future should unfold like a perfectly written script. For many simple systems, this expectation works well. A pendulum swinging through a small angle can be predicted with great accuracy. A ball thrown through the air follows a path that can be calculated if the forces are simple enough. A planet moving around a star can be described with astonishing precision over long periods when the system is not disturbed too strongly. But many systems in nature are not so gentle. They contain feedback, interaction, friction, flow, delay, and many moving parts. Weather, ocean currents, turbulent smoke, dripping water, population growth, heart rhythms, and even some patterns in planetary motion can behave in ways that are lawful yet extremely sensitive. A tiny difference at the beginning can grow into a very large difference later. This is the central idea behind chaos. The familiar phrase butterfly effect is a poetic way to describe this sensitivity. It does not mean that one insect literally controls the weather in a simple, direct way. It means that in a complex atmosphere, very small changes can become amplified through many interacting processes. Air moves, warms, cools, rises, sinks, carries moisture, forms clouds, and transfers energy. Because the atmosphere is deeply connected, a tiny difference can spread through the system. Over time, two nearly identical starting conditions may lead to very different weather patterns. This is why long-term weather prediction has limits. Weather is not unknowable because it has no rules. It is difficult because the rules act through a system so sensitive and complex that small uncertainties grow. We can measure temperature, pressure, humidity, wind, and many other conditions, but no measurement is infinitely precise. Every observation has a margin of uncertainty. In a chaotic system, that small uncertainty can expand. The forecast may be excellent for a while, then gradually lose sharpness as the system evolves. Fractals enter chaos because chaotic systems often create patterns that are irregular yet structured. When scientists study how such systems move through their possible states, they sometimes find shapes called strange attractors. An attractor is a set of states that a system tends to approach or remain near over time. A simple attractor might be a resting point, like a ball settling at the bottom of a bowl. Another attractor might be a repeating cycle, like a stable rhythm. A strange attractor is more complicated. The system never settles into a single point or a simple loop, yet its motion stays within a patterned region. The shape of a strange attractor can be fractal. This means that when the system is viewed in the right mathematical space, its long-term behavior may form folded, layered, delicate structures. The motion seems unpredictable in detail, but it is not wandering anywhere at all. It remains confined to a shape. The system has freedom, yet that freedom has boundaries. It behaves with surprise, yet the surprise has a form. A classic way to imagine this is to think of a point moving through an invisible landscape of possibilities. The point represents the current state of the system. In a simple system, the point may settle down or circle the same path again and again. In a chaotic system, it may travel in a way that never exactly repeats. Yet over time, the path may draw a recognizable shape. It folds back near itself without crossing in the same way. It returns to familiar regions without doing exactly the same thing. This is the hidden order inside chaos. Fractals are connected to this folding. In many chaotic systems, the space of possible outcomes is stretched and folded repeatedly. Stretching separates nearby starting points, making their futures diverge. Folding keeps the motion within limits, preventing the system from simply flying away into unlimited values. Together, stretching and folding create layered structure. A simple repeated process can produce a shape with fine detail at many scales. This can be compared to kneading dough, although the comparison is only a gentle image. When dough is stretched and folded, material that was once close together may become separated, while distant parts may be brought near. In mathematics, repeated stretching and folding can create complicated patterns. Tiny differences in starting position become important because each repetition magnifies and reorganizes them. The final arrangement may be difficult to trace backward, even though each step followed a rule. Chaotic behavior can appear in systems that are completely deterministic. Deterministic means that the next state follows from the current state according to definite rules. If we knew the starting condition with perfect accuracy and could calculate without error, the future would be fixed by the rules. The problem is that perfect accuracy is not available in the physical world. Since chaotic systems magnify tiny differences, practical prediction becomes limited. This is one of the most important distinctions in the science of chaos. Chaos does not require chance at the level of the rule. It requires sensitivity in the way the rule unfolds. This has changed how scientists think about predictability. Before chaos theory became widely understood, it was tempting to imagine that unpredictability came mainly from ignorance or randomness. If a system seemed irregular, perhaps we simply lacked enough information. or perhaps random forces were pushing it around. Chaos showed that even simple deterministic rules can generate irregular behavior. A system can be understandable in principle and still resist exact long-term prediction in practice. This matters for many natural phenomena. Turbulence in fluids is one important example. Smooth flow can become swirling, unstable, and complicated. Smoke rising from a candle may begin as a thin stream, then curl into eddies and break into restless motion. Water moving around rocks can form vortices, ripples, and shifting patterns. The equations that describe fluid motion are known, but the behavior can become extraordinarily complex because many scales of motion interact. Large swirls break into smaller swirls, and smaller swirls pass energy down toward finer motion. This cascade can create patterns that have fractal-like qualities. The connection between chaos and fractals also appears in boundaries between outcomes. In some systems, the starting conditions that lead to one result may be woven together with starting conditions that lead to another result. A tiny change in the starting point may send the system toward a different future. When these outcome boundaries are mapped, they can be fractal. They may contain intricate edges where certainty becomes difficult because neighboring points do not share the same fate. This does not mean chaos makes science hopeless. It means science must be careful about the kind of question being asked. Exact long-term prediction may be impossible for some systems, but patterns can still be understood statistically. We may not know the precise shape of every cloud far in the future, but we can study climate, seasons, energy balance, and probabilities. We may not predict every small swirl in turbulent water, but we can understand average flow, energy transfer, and the conditions that produce turbulence. Chaos limits one kind of certainty while allowing other kinds of knowledge. In a way, chaos theory made science more realistic. It showed that nature can be lawful without being simple. It gave scientists a way to respect complexity instead of treating it as mere noise. Fractals helped make that complexity visible. They showed that irregular patterns can have structure, that rough boundaries can have measurable qualities, and that unpredictable motion can leave behind organized shapes. There is also a quiet beauty in the relationship between chaos and fractals. The connection helps explain why certain natural patterns feel familiar even when they are never exactly repeated. A flame flickers with recognizable behavior, although no single movement returns in the same way. Waves break with a shared rhythm, while every crest has its own form. A chaotic system may never repeat exactly, yet its motion can return again and again to a patterned region. A fractal may seem wild at the edge, yet its wildness is shaped by a rule. Both ideas sit between strict order and complete disorder. They show a world where the future is sensitive, where detail matters, and where form can arise from motion. This is why chaos does not need to feel frightening. It does not mean everything is meaningless or uncontrolled. It means that some systems are too deeply connected for simple prediction. Their behavior depends on tiny differences, repeated interactions, and time. Hidden inside that difficulty, there can be structure. As this thought becomes softer, let it take away the need to know every future detail. The world can be patterned without being perfectly predictable. Life can move through uncertainty and still remain held by deeper rhythms. For tonight, it is enough to rest inside that gentler truth, letting the mind settle like a point returning to a quiet shape in the dark. Chapter 8. Fractal Dimensions, shapes between lines, surfaces, and solids. A fractal dimension is a way of describing shapes that are too rich, too rough, or too deeply folded to fit comfortably into the ordinary categories of lines, surfaces, and solid bodies. Most of us learn dimension through simple examples. A line has one dimension because it has length. A flat sheet has two dimensions because it has length and width. A solid object has three dimensions because it has length, width, and depth. This way of thinking is useful, and it matches the clean geometry of many ideal shapes. A ruler, a page, a box, a ball, and a room all seem to belong easily to these familiar levels of space. Fractals make dimensions stranger. They do not destroy the old idea, but they reveal that it is not always enough. Some shapes behave as if they are more complicated than a simple line, while still not becoming a full surface. Some surfaces become so wrinkled, folded, or porous that they behave as if they carry more structure than an ordinary smooth surface. Fractal dimension gives us a way to describe this in-between quality. The easiest place to begin is with a line. A perfectly straight line is simple. If you double its size, its length doubles. It does not become wider or thicker. It stretches in one direction. A flat square behaves differently. If you double its size in every direction, its area grows much more because length and width both increase. A cube grows even more strongly when enlarged because length, width, and depth all increase together. Dimension is connected to how a shape changes when scale changes. This is the quiet idea behind fractal dimension. Instead of asking only what a shape looks like, we ask how its measured detail changes as we look at it at different scales. A smooth line behaves like a line. A smooth surface behaves like a surface. But a jagged, folded, branching, or twisting pattern may grow in measured complexity at a rate that falls between the ordinary categories. It may be drawn as a curve, yet it can wind through space so densely that it carries more detail than an ordinary curve. It can be a boundary, yet it can feel almost like a region. Imagine a very simple, smooth curve on a page. As you magnify it, a tiny part of the curve begins to look nearly straight. This is why smooth curves are easy to handle mathematically. Their small pieces are gentle. They calm down under magnification. Now imagine a rough curve that keeps showing bends inside bends. Each closer view reveals more turns, more corners, more fine structure. The curve does not calm down so quickly. Its detail has a habit of returning. A fractal dimension tries to capture that habit. This does not mean the shape is magical or physically impossible. It means its structure depends strongly on scale. A coast, a crack, a branching root system, a cloud edge, or a porous material can all have features that matter at many different sizes. If a measurement changes in a consistent way as the measuring scale changes, then a fractal dimension can describe that pattern of change. The dimension is less like a simple label and more like a fingerprint of roughness. One of the most important things to understand is that fractal dimension is often not a whole number. Ordinary geometry gives us whole number dimensions, 1, 2, and 3. Fractal geometry can give values between them. A curve may have a dimension between 1 and 2. That means it is more space-filling than a smooth line, but does not fill an area like a full surface. A rough surface may have a dimension between 2 and 3. That means it is more complex than a smooth surface, but does not fill a volume like a solid block. This idea can feel strange because we are used to dimension as a yes or no category. A line is one-dimensional. A sheet is two-dimensional. A box is three-dimensional. Fractals ask us to think more gently. Dimension can describe behavior across scale. A shape can occupy a middle place, not because it violates space, but because its details multiply in a way that ordinary categories do not fully express. A classic thought experiment makes the idea easier. Suppose a line is repeatedly bent or folded so that each stage adds more detail. At the beginning, it is close to a simple line. After many stages, it has become much longer while staying within a limited region. It has not become a painted surface because it still traces a path, yet it behaves less like a simple line than before. Its fractal dimension would reflect this growing ability to spread through space. In real nature, this can matter a great deal. A rough surface with a higher fractal dimension may provide more area for contact than a smooth surface of the same overall size. This can affect how materials react chemically, how water moves through rock, how particles stick, how light scatters, and how biological tissues exchange substances. The dimension is not just a mathematical curiosity. It can describe features that influence real physical behavior. Consider the inside of a porous rock. From the outside, a small piece of rock may look compact. Inside, it may contain tiny passages, cavities, grains, and surfaces. Water, gas, or dissolved minerals may move through these spaces. A simple measurement of the rock's outer size would miss much of what matters. The internal surface can be irregular across many scales, and a fractal description can help explain how much hidden structure the rock contains. The same kind of thinking can apply to biological forms. The surface of certain tissues is folded or branched to increase exchange. The branching structure of blood vessels and airways can be studied in terms of how it fills the body and reaches smaller regions. The useful question is not merely whether the pattern looks beautiful. The useful question is how effectively it connects, fills, distributes, or exchanges across scale. Fractal dimension gives one tool for describing that effectiveness. There are several ways to estimate fractal dimension, but the core intuition can remain simple. We cover, measure, or examine a shape using tools of different sizes, then observe how the amount needed changes as the tool becomes smaller. A smooth line has a predictable scaling behavior. A smooth surface has another. A fractal-like pattern may follow a different pattern that lies between familiar cases. The number that describes this scaling behavior becomes its fractal dimension. This is why fractal dimension is closely tied to measurement. It does not only describe appearance, it describes how appearance changes with resolution. A shape may seem modest from far away, then reveal great complexity when examined more closely. If that complexity grows according to a consistent scaling pattern, the fractal dimension gives us a compact way to express it. It is a number that tells a story about hidden detail. There is an important caution here. Natural objects are not perfect mathematical fractals. Their fractal-like behavior usually exists only across a limited range. A coastline eventually reaches sand grains, rocks, and moving water. A lung airway reaches tiny air sacs. A rough material reaches the scale of crystals, molecules, or atoms. At those limits, the pattern changes. So when scientists speak of fractal dimension in nature, they usually mean an estimated dimension over a particular range of scales. The scale range matters. This makes fractal dimension both powerful and careful. It does not pretend that nature is infinite in detail. It asks whether a pattern behaves fractally over the scales we can observe and measure. When used well, it helps compare roughness, branching, and complexity in systems that would otherwise be hard to describe. It gives structure to forms that once seemed too irregular for ordinary geometry. The idea also changes how we think about space itself. A line, a surface, and a solid are still fundamental concepts. But between them, there are patterns that fill space in more subtle ways. A fractal curve can be thin yet richly spread. A surface can be flat in its overall shape, yet deeply wrinkled in its fine structure. A network can reach through a volume without occupying all of it. Fractal dimension lets us talk about these middle behaviors without forcing them into the wrong category. There is something beautiful in this. The world is not made only from smooth, ideal objects. It is full of forms that hesitate between simple definitions. The edge of a leaf, the texture of bark, the branching of vessels, the outline of a cloud, and the hidden surface inside stone all carry degrees of complexity. Fractal dimension gives those degrees a language. As this chapter comes to rest, let the idea become gentle rather than technical. Some shapes are between things. Some patterns are more than a line and less than a surface, more textured than a surface and less complete than a solid. They belong to the quiet middle spaces of geometry. And in that thought, there is room to breathe. The world does not always need hard categories. Tonight, it can simply unfold in soft dimensions, while your mind loosens its grip and settles into sleep. Chapter 9. How Fractals Changed Science, Art, and Technology. Fractals changed science, art, and technology because they gave people a new way to describe forms that had always been visible, yet had never fit neatly inside ordinary geometry. For a long time, the clean shapes of classical geometry carried most of the authority. Circles, spheres, planes, cubes, cones, and straight lines were easy to measure and easy to use. They helped describe planets, machines, buildings, lenses, and many idealized physical systems. This was enormously successful, and it remains essential. But the world outside ideal models is full of roughness. Mountains are broken and layered, clouds are soft and uneven, trees branch, blood vessels divide, metals crack, coastlines twist, flames flicker, turbulence curls. Ordinary geometry could approximate these forms, but it often had to remove the very irregularity that made them interesting. Fractal geometry gave that irregularity a place in serious thought. It allowed scientists to ask how roughness changes with scale, how branching networks fill space, how surfaces become more complex when examined closely, and how simple repeated processes can produce rich structure. This did not replace classical geometry. It extended it. It gave researchers a language for the in-between forms that appear so often in nature and technology. One of the earliest and clearest impacts was in the study of natural surfaces and landscapes. A mountain range is not a smooth triangle rising from the ground. It is shaped by uplift, erosion, cracking, weathering, ice, water, and time. Its ridges and valleys often show structure across many scales. Fractal analysis gave geologists and geographers a way to describe this kind of roughness more precisely. Instead of treating irregularity as meaningless noise, they could study whether the roughness followed patterns across scale. This helped make the shape of landscapes more measurable without pretending they were smooth. Fractals also became useful in the study of cracks, fractures, and broken materials. When a material fails, the break rarely forms a perfectly flat surface. It can branch, roughen, and spread through weak points. The resulting fracture surface may contain complexity at many sizes. Understanding this matters in engineering, geology, and materials science because cracks affect strength, stability, and safety. Fractal ideas can help describe how fracture patterns grow and how rough fracture surfaces behave. They do not make failure simple, but they give better tools for describing the geometry of damage. Porous materials are another important example. Rocks, ceramics, soils, filters, bones, and many manufactured materials contain networks of spaces and surfaces inside them. Fluids can move through those spaces. Chemical reactions can happen along internal surfaces. A material may look solid from the outside while containing a hidden labyrinth within. Fractal descriptions can help analyze the complexity of these internal surfaces and channels. This matters for groundwater movement, oil and gas reservoirs, filtration, medicine, and the design of materials that need high surface area. In biology and medicine, fractals offered a way to examine forms that had always been difficult to describe. Living bodies are filled with branching, folded, and irregular structures. The blood vessel network, the airways of the lungs, the branching of nerves, and the folding of tissues all show patterns that can be studied through scale and structure. Fractal analysis has been used to examine medical images, tissue organization, blood vessel growth, and changes in biological rhythms. It is not a magic diagnostic tool by itself, and it must be used carefully, but it can add useful information about complexity, branching, and structural change. The heartbeat gives a quiet example. A healthy heart does not beat with perfect mechanical regularity. Its rhythm changes from moment to moment as the body responds to breathing, movement, rest, stress, and nervous system signals. Some of this variation has complex patterns across time. Researchers have studied these patterns using ideas related to fractals and scaling. In some conditions, the natural complexity of biological rhythms can change. This does not mean a single fractal measurement can explain health, but it shows how the language of fractals can reach beyond visible shapes into patterns that unfold through time. Fractals also influence the study of turbulence. Turbulent flow is one of the great difficult problems of physics. It appears in air, water, smoke, weather, engines, rivers, oceans, and stars. Turbulence contains swirls within swirls, motion across many scales, and energy passing from larger motions into smaller ones. Fractal ideas helped scientists think about the geometry of turbulent structures, especially the way irregular regions of flow can stretch, fold, and break into fine patterns. The full physics remains difficult, but fractals gave a visual and mathematical language for some of its layered complexity. In technology, one of the most visible uses of fractal ideas appeared in computer graphics. Early digital images of natural landscapes often looked artificial because smooth geometry could not easily imitate the roughness of nature. Mountains looked too polished. Clouds looked too simple. Trees looked too repetitive. Fractal methods help generate more convincing textures, terrains, coastlines, plants, flames, and clouds. By using repeated rules with controlled variation, artists and engineers could create visual complexity without drawing every detail by hand. This changed the appearance of digital worlds. The power of fractals in computer graphics comes from efficiency. A rule can generate detail at many scales. A landscape can be built from layered roughness. A cloud can be shaped by patterns of noise and variation. A tree can grow through branching instructions. The result may not be a scientifically exact copy of nature, but it can feel natural to the eye because nature itself often contains repeated structure across scale. Fractal methods help digital art move away from sterile smoothness toward organic richness. Fractals also shaped visual art more directly. Artists were drawn to fractal images because they seemed to combine strict rule and visual freedom. A fractal image can be generated by mathematics, yet the result may look like coral, galaxies, flowers, rivers, smoke, or imagined architecture. It creates a strange partnership between calculation and wonder. The artist may choose color, framing, depth, contrast, and region of focus, but the underlying complexity comes from the rule. This gave art a new way to explore emergence, repetition, and scale. The appeal is not only visual. Fractals touch a deep habit of perception. The human eye is surrounded by natural patterns that are neither perfectly smooth nor completely disordered. Branches, waves, rocks, clouds, and leaves all carry structured irregularity. Fractal art can feel satisfying because it echoes that middle ground. It offers order without becoming sterile and variation without dissolving into pure mess. This may be one reason fractal patterns are often experienced as calming or mesmerizing. In communication technology, fractal geometry inspired certain antenna designs. An antenna must interact with electromagnetic waves, and its shape affects how it sends or receives signals. Some fractal-inspired antennas use repeated patterns to fit longer effective paths or multiple resonant features into a compact space. This can be useful when devices need to work across different frequency ranges while remaining small. The details depend on the design and application, but fractal geometry gave engineers a creative way to shape electrical behavior through geometry. Fractals have also influenced image compression and signal processing. Digital images often contain patterns at several scales. A patch of texture may resemble another patch at a different size or location. Some compression methods explore these similarities to store images more efficiently. The practical history of image compression includes many competing methods, and fractal compression did not become the universal solution once imagined. Still, it showed that scale-related repetition could be used as a technical idea, not only as a visual curiosity. In architecture and design, fractal ideas helped people think about patterns that feel layered and human-scaled. Traditional buildings, ornaments, streets, and gardens often contain detail at several levels, from large forms down to smaller textures. Some designers have used fractal thinking to create spaces that feel rich without becoming chaotic. This does not mean every pleasing building is fractal, or that fractal patterns automatically make good design. But the concept gives designers another way to think about how the eye moves from whole form to smaller detail. Fractals also changed education. They gave teachers a vivid bridge between mathematics and the visible world. Many mathematical ideas remain abstract to beginners, but fractals can be seen. A student can watch a simple rule generate a complex image. They can understand that repetition matters. They can see scale, boundary, growth, and dimension in one picture. Fractals made advanced ideas feel less remote because they turned mathematics into something almost tactile. Perhaps the deepest change was philosophical, although it grew from precise science. Fractals taught people to take roughness seriously. They showed that irregular shapes could have measurable structure. They revealed that complexity might come from simple, repeated rules. They offered a way to think about the world as layered rather than merely messy. This is why fractals move so widely across science, art, and technology. They were useful because they described real patterns. They were beautiful because those patterns touched the imagination. They were powerful because they connected measurement with wonder. A coastline, a crack, a lung, a mountain, a cloud, a digital landscape, an antenna, and a work of art can all become part of the same larger conversation about scale. As this chapter comes to rest, the practical world begins to look softer. Technology, science, and art are not separate from nature's patterns. They are ways of noticing, shaping, and learning from them. And for now, you can let those patterns become quiet, like branches in the dark or waves smoothing themselves under moonlight, while the day fades into something gentle and still. Chapter 10. Why Fractals Feel Infinite. Fractals feel infinite because they show the mind a rare kind of depth, a pattern that seems complete from far away, yet keeps opening when we come closer. This feeling is not just a matter of beauty, it comes from the way fractals are built. A fractal can carry related structure across scale. A large shape may contain smaller forms that resemble it, and those smaller forms may contain still smaller echoes. In an ideal mathematical fractal, this process has no final smallest level. The rule can continue in thought without reaching a last detail. The image may fit inside a limited space, yet the pattern inside it can suggest endless continuation. That contrast is part of the wonder. A fractal can be bounded and still feel vast. It may sit on a screen, on a page, or inside a simple mathematical description, but the structure it represents can keep unfolding. The object has an outer limit, while its inner detail seems to resist completion. This is very different from an ordinary smooth shape. A circle can be graceful, and a sphere can be beautiful. But once their form is understood, they do not keep revealing new kinds of internal structure. A fractal invites repeated attention. The feeling of infinity also comes from magnification. When we zoom into many mathematical fractals, the image does not become plain. It becomes more intricate. Spirals lead to smaller spirals. Branches divide into finer branches. Boundaries curl into islands and filaments. Regions that first looked empty begin to contain structure. The eye expects magnification to simplify, because that is often what happens with smooth things. A polished curve becomes nearly straight when seen very close. A flat surface becomes flatter. A fractal resists that expectation. Closer viewing brings more pattern. This does not mean every fractal repeats in exactly the same way everywhere. Some mathematical fractals contain exact copies of themselves. Others show related forms, distorted echoes, or repeating styles rather than perfect duplicates. Natural fractal-like forms are more limited and more irregular. A tree branch does not continue into smaller branches forever. A coastline does not contain infinite physical bends. A lung has a smallest functional scale. Nature is made of matter, and matter sets limits. Yet the feeling of infinity remains because many natural forms carry enough repeated structure across scale to awaken the same intuition. That intuition is powerful because the human mind is sensitive to pattern. We notice repetition. We notice resemblance. We notice when a small form seems to belong to a larger form. Fractals give the mind a place to move. They are ordered enough to be followed and varied enough to stay alive. If a pattern is too simple, attention quickly reaches the end of it. If a pattern is too chaotic, attention cannot find a path. Fractals often sit between these extremes. They provide structure and surprise at the same time. This balance may help explain why fractal patterns can feel calming. Many natural environments contain fractal-like features. Tree canopies, clouds, waves, mountain ridges, ferns, river networks, and the textures of stone and bark. These patterns are familiar to the nervous system because life evolved among them. A forest does not present the eye with blank sameness, yet it also does not usually overwhelm it with total disorder. The branches, leaves, shadows, and gaps form a layered visual world. There is enough regularity to feel coherent and enough variation to remain gentle. The infinite feeling also has a mathematical source. A simple rule can create complexity that no person could draw by hand in full. This is one of the great lessons of fractals. Richness can emerge from repetition. A rule does not need to be long to produce depth. When the result is magnified, it can appear as though imagination itself has been exceeded. The pattern seems to know more than the person who began it. This is because the repeated process explores possibilities step by step, carrying consequences far beyond the simplicity of the starting instruction. In this sense, fractals reveal the difference between a rule and its unfolding. A rule can be short, but the behavior of that rule can be enormous. A seed contains instructions for growth, yet the final tree depends on time, environment, and countless local changes. A river begins with water moving downhill, yet the final drainage network records terrain, rainfall, erosion, resistance, and history. A mathematical fractal begins with a precise instruction, yet its full form may contain endless detail. The unfolding is where the depth appears. This is why fractals often feel like small models of a larger truth. The universe itself is not simply a fractal in the strict mathematical sense, and it would be inaccurate to claim that everything repeats perfectly across all scales. The physical universe changes character as we move from galaxies to stars, from planets to rocks, from cells to molecules, from atoms to smaller particles. Different laws and forces become important at different scales. Still, nature often uses repetition, branching, roughness, and layered structure. Fractals help us see those patterns without forcing the whole universe into a single shape. The feeling of infinity also comes from boundaries. In many fractals, the boundary is the richest place. It is where inside and outside meet, where stability and escape divide, where one behavior gives way to another. A smooth boundary is easy to imagine. A fractal boundary can become so folded and detailed that it seems to contain a world of transitions. The edge becomes a landscape. Instead of ending the shape, it opens the shape. This is a subtle idea, but it reaches beyond mathematics. Many interesting things in nature happen at boundaries. The shore between land and sea, the edge of a cloud, the surface of a leaf, the membrane of a cell, the meeting place between air and water, the contact between rock and flowing liquid. Boundaries are where exchange happens. Heat moves, gases pass, waves break, minerals dissolve, life absorbs, and forces interact. A complex boundary can create more contact and more possibility. In that way, the richness of a fractal edge is not merely visual. It reflects something deeply practical about how the world works. Fractals feel infinite because they make limits porous in the imagination. A finite branch suggests a larger tree. A small spiral suggests a deeper spiral. A coastline suggests detail beyond the map. A mathematical image suggests further magnification beyond the screen. The mind follows these suggestions inward. It senses continuation even where the eye must stop. The physical view ends, but the pattern implies more. There is also a quiet, emotional reason. Fractals show that complexity can be held inside order. This can be reassuring. The world often feels too complicated to understand, filled with events, choices, movements, and changes that do not form a neat line. Fractals offer a different kind of order, one that does not require smoothness or perfect simplicity. They show that roughness can have structure, that irregularity can carry meaning, and that repeated processes can make forms of great beauty. This is why fractals are so often used as images of infinity, even when the real object is finite. They do not merely say that something is large. They suggest inexhaustibility. They imply that more can always be found by changing scale, by looking again, by moving deeper into the pattern. This is a gentler kind of infinity than an endless straight line. It is not only distance without end, it is depth without a final glance. There is a final reason fractals feel infinite, and it has to do with time. A fractal is usually seen as a shape, but it is often produced by a process. The pattern appears because something has been repeated. A step is taken, then another step follows from it, then another. When we look at the finished image, we are also looking at the memory of repetition. The form seems to contain its own history. That is true in a mathematical image, where repeated instructions build the pattern. It is also true in nature, where growth, erosion, branching, freezing, cracking, and flowing leave traces behind. A river valley remembers water moving over land. A tree remembers seasons of growth. Frost remembers the conditions under which crystals formed. The visible structure becomes a quiet record of time acting through matter. This gives fractals a sense of depth that is spatial and temporal at once. They feel infinite because they do not only extend inward through scale, they also seem to carry the echo of becoming. For sleep, this idea is especially fitting. The mind does not need to solve the fractal. It does not need to reach the final branch, the final curve, the final edge. There is no last detail that must be held tonight. The pattern can continue quietly on its own. You can let it be endless without following it all the way. And perhaps that is the calmest lesson fractals offer. We do not always need complete understanding to feel connected to order. Sometimes it is enough to sense that beneath the roughness, there is a pattern. Beneath the pattern, another pattern. And beneath that, more quiet structure fading beyond sight. So let the image soften now. A branch within a branch, a curve within a curve, a small world held inside a larger one. The day can loosen its sharp edges. The mind can stop measuring. Somewhere in the dark, the patterns continue without effort, repeating gently, carrying you toward rest. And now, my friend, we've reached the end of our quiet journey through fractals. We've seen how simple patterns can repeat through scale, how roughness can carry order, how nature builds with branches, folds, boundaries, and hidden dimensions, and why some shapes seem to keep opening forever the closer we look. If you're still awake and would like to keep drifting through science, you can choose another video and let the next idea carry you a little farther into the night. But if sleep is already near, let it come gently. Thank you for spending this time with me, my friend. Rest well and sweet dreams among the stars.